right, chapter 32. This is a fairly short chapter. We're going to just look at some elements of the classical concerto, different than the Baroque concerto, the classical concerto. And I'm sorry, I didn't make up these names. I'm not trying to confuse you. That's just what they're called. All right, so the classical era brought with it a shift in emphasis from the solo group to the solo instrument. Remember, the Baroque concerto would be a contrasting, you'd have that ritornello, and then you'd have that contrasting group of small instruments, and then you go back to the ritornello. So the same idea is there, that contrast between the larger group and the smaller group. But for this particular season in the classical time, it was a solo instrument paired with the larger orchestra. So typically you'd have a virtuoso soloist, someone who is really strong at their instrument, very good at that. And typically you would have a 3-movement piece. The first movement would be fast, second slow, third fast. So that's different than the symphony because the symphony had 4 movements. Remember, it added that dance movement in the third slot. So the classical concerto is just 3 movements. Similar to the Baroque concerto, you'd have a cadenza, which is that solo passage at the end that gives them a chance to really show off and flourish their skills. During that point, the orchestra falls silent, and it's very improvisational for the soloist. Lots of free play on one or more themes. This is a picture of a concerto performance, 1777. The woman here is playing as the soloist with the orchestra. So the first movement of a concerto in the classical era would be sonata allegro form, which we just talked about. One thing to note, though, is it would have a double exposition, which means that exposition would be played twice. So before you go to the development, you would have 2 expositions, then the development, then the recapitulation. The reason for the double is because the first time the orchestra played it. The second time, the soloist played it. And typically the soloist would do a lot of elaboration on the theme. Then remember, we'd have to have that cadenza to be able to have that nearing of the end of the movement feeling, and then that coda, which is going to give you a strong affirmation of that home key or that tonic key. Mozart wrote a bunch of these, and his instrument of choice, piano, that was what he performed most often at. And so he wrote 27 different piano concertos. A lot of these were performed by him, public performances by him. You hear a lot of brilliant flourishes and elegant gestures in them. This is called a forte piano. And you can see the black and white is reversed. Like today's piano, the white keys are on the bottom, the black keys are on the top. It's reversed. So in 1784, he wrote 5 different concertos. All right. K453 was composed for one of his students. And we're going to listen to that, otherwise known as Piano Concerto in G major. G major is that home key. We're going to be listening to the first movement, which is the Allegro and that double exposition sonata form or first movement concerto form. You can refer to it either way. You're going to hear the exposition, which is going to be played by the orchestra. Theme 1 in the violins. Theme 2 is going to be a little quiet with violins and woodwinds. And then you're going to hear the solo play their expositions. That's the second exposition of the double exposition form. You can hear a different theme between themes 1 and theme 2. Then that'll take us to the developmental section, different modulations, followed by the recapitulation, which is going to be in the home key. And the cadenza at the end of the recapitulation would be that flurry of activity. Again, a lot of variations, improvisation for the soloist. Follow along with the listening guide. If you get lost, you can look at the time signature stamps to help you find where the development starts, where the solo exposition starts, the recapitulation, etc. Thank you.